There's no video. What are you doing?
It's my audience clapping for me.
I thought you were trying to sync it.
We have a live studio audience here.
Yeah.
For this amazing MVP Days session, which is about PowerShell.
Yeah.
And this session with PowerShell is absolutely amazing. And our live studio audience thinks they're really funny because we're not actually recording the camera.
Jokes on them.
Yeah.
Hi, guys.
Just audio.
Yes. And
we got too much good stuff to show you on the screen.
Half an hour.
Clutter it with our faces.
Half an hour. And we've decided to do something very cool in this half hour just for you, our live audience for MVP Days. We are going to do a live code review.
Yeah. It's about to get all judgmental up in here.
Yes, because Thomas has actually personally trained me 12% of what I know about PowerShell.
From the ground up to 12%.
That's right.
I taught him 12% of what he knows.
So everything that he criticizes that's in as part of my code, at some point in time, he taught me how to do that. So technically, he's actually criticizing himself.
Should we introduce ourselves?
I think we maybe should.
Okay.
I am Dave Kawula, the author of a couple books, which you can find here at davekawula.com. Oh, and if you didn't know, I made a website all about myself, just in case you wanted to learn more.
That's pretty fancy.
About
Looks
me.
like you didn't fix the link for the books, though.
Yes, I did.
Otherwise, it's AzureWebsites.net.
No, I'm still working on the blog, okay? But as you can see, Tom and I have done a lot of work inside of here. We're actually the proud main authors inside of a series of books called Master PowerShell Tricks.
Yeah, I think I've contributed at least 10 chapters to each of those 4 books.
Yes, and we actually have over, I think there's over 30,000 copies of those books out right now.
That's pretty good.
Now the cool part is, for all of you that are watching right now, if you want to learn a little bit more about PowerShell moving through this session,
But they're expensive.
then what you can do is actually click on one of these.
Do they
After
cost a
going
lot of money?
through my website, davekawula.com, you can actually take yourself into LeanPub, and you can get the books for the illustriously low price of $19.95. And if you buy right now today, we'll throw in the second book.
Another?
Yes.
Are they about PowerShell tricks?
They're all about PowerShell tricks. And look what happens. If you take and you click on that slider bar and go all the way to the left, I'm giving them away to you.
No.
For free.
For free?
Everyone in the world right now can get themselves a copy of our latest book, Master PowerShell Tricks, Volume 3, which is filled with more tricks than Volumes 1 and 2.
The critically acclaimed series.
Yes.
Forward by?
Absolutely amazing. Forward by the one and only Jeff Woolsey.
And to be clear, these are not volumes that necessarily build on each other. Like, they're not just revisions.
No.
They're more
Tricks.
It's like how an encyclopedia might have different volumes.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Yeah. So that's pretty awesome. That's a good way to start things off. Now, let's get into why we are really here, Tom. We are here to go through a script that you and I have been working on for probably the better part of 18 months. And when I say we've been working on, I mean I've been working on.
And I've been criticizing.
Yes, because when I spend 6 months trying to code something in PowerShell and you fix it in 60 seconds or less, I find it moderately annoying.
I thought that would have been good for your self-esteem. It's good for my self-esteem.
It's very good for your self-esteem, and we've got a lot of work inside of it. And we've actually made some big advancements.
Yeah, I
inside
gotta
of Big
say,
Demo.
it's come a long way.
Oh my God,
and
is
in
that
18,
Thomas Rayner?
Oh, there we go. See,
Yeah,
live
oh,
fans.
just walking by.
Yeah, this is
Authentic experience.
If people don't know, we're actually at Microsoft head office right now.
Yep, we're in building
92. All right, so let's take a look here. And so this right here, what we're looking at, Tom, is our big demo script. If you want to get yourself a copy of what we're looking at here today, you can actually get it off of my GitHub repo. It's just github.com/dkawula, and you can grab it right here. This is the link. You can grab it.
Code.
All types of good code. 2,500 plus lines of handwritten code, all authentic and genuine. Nothing, maybe almost nothing, borrowed off the internet.
Hardly anything copy and pasted or stolen from Ben Armstrong.
Exactly. Thank you, Ben. So, what are some of the things that we can now do with Big Demo? I'd like to introduce some of my latest things that I've been building into here.
Yeah, show off.
So, a couple of the things that we've done is we've actually built some routing function inside of the lab build. And if you don't know what Big Demo does, it actually stands up a virtual environment for you in Hyper-V, including building the gold images for you right from scratch. The only thing you need to get started is copies of your media. That's it. And it'll build those gold images from scratch, build the VMs, and now start installing some of the tooling for it.
So what was the original purpose of this, and how did you adapt it?
So the original purpose of this was, it was actually authored by one of my good friends at Microsoft, Ben Armstrong. They go through what are called daily builds of the platforms and the operating system, Tom. So they'll get almost like weekly or daily releases. So let's say a new version of Windows Server would come out to them almost weekly. They would have to go through all their regression tests over and over again, and have to go recode all of that in PowerShell over and over again was a real pain. So they came up with, or he came up with the construct of what was Big Demo, and where he first showed us the skeleton of what we call Big Demo here.
Version beta 01.
Yes. He did a session that was called Dude, Hold My Beer While I Build Your Data Center. And he built
really
domain controller. He built nested hosts and much more. But
the point I'm going for here is the real magic and value of this script is that they use it for spinning up instant labs for their daily builds. But I bet you need to spin up test labs, and it's such a pain to, I need to build a domain controller and this and that, and I need to build an app server, and then I need to deploy my app just so I can test it on an ephemeral environment. Well, this takes a whole lot of the pain out of it, doesn't it?
Absolutely. So let's dig in. Let's dig into what we got here. Where would you like to start,
Let's start at the beginning.
Mr. Code Reviewer? Like up here?
Sure.
Okay. So we can see that, Tom, I've given you credit inside the script.
You have.
Credit where credit is due. And you're kind of teaching me the best ways of building the initial opening to a script, which I don't even know what that's called.
So there's a little bit of mixing and matching going on here. There's comment-based help, which is used in the get-help command line.
Okay.
And when you do get help, if this is structured in a specific way, it'll categorize that help and help you parse it. For instance, on line 20, the synopsis creates a big demo lab. Line 22 is going to show you the description of the script. And as you go through, so you can go get-help-examples, and it'll show you, well, Dave needs to put a meaningful example in there. But it'll show you the examples, it'll show you how for all the parameters and things like that. So the stuff that's at the very, very top isn't going to be part of the comment-based help, but it'll be part of what you're looking at to read the script.
So how would I launch that then? Would I just go like get help and then the name of the script, and then it would pull up the associated help file at the beginning?
Yeah, exactly. You'd go get help and then the path to the script. This is just, it's not even saved in the ISE, so we can't show you that right now unless you want to save it on his computer. But that's exactly right. You just save it and then
and that's actually pretty cool for me, being kind of new to PowerShell and just kind of learning as I go. I actually didn't know that was why that was in there. I thought it was just a way that everybody built PowerShell scripts, so I just started copying and pasting it.
And that's why it's structured this way, with the period and then the what's the name of it? The label for what the part's going to be.
Cool. All right. So now, where would you like to go next, my good friend?
Well, why don't we just kind of chronologically go? Let's hit the big points, because I don't think we're going to have time to go through the whole thing.
All right, so there's a parameters section inside of here. This is pretty standard stuff for whenever you would take and you'd build out a script where you'd want to take and call out some, I guess, variables that you wanted to pipe in for the rest of the usage inside the script, right? So
you got a little bit of parameter validation going on to make sure that people don't feed you bad data. You've got a lot of default values set. Looks pretty good.
Yeah. This should look good.
A plain text password, but I'm pretty sure you need to have it that way for your purposes in the script.
Yes, absolutely. And this should look good because you wrote that.
Yep.
Okay, so we got some parameters. So when we run Big Demo, it's going to prompt us for a bunch of values that we put in. Now, the functions is where the magic really happens, all right? Because some of these actually did come out of Ben Armstrong's initial version, beta 0001 of this, and they really help us out a lot as we go to execute the code.
I can see that this is the bulk of the script. It goes from line 112 to line 2106.
Yes, and I've done a lot of work inside of there, adding some new functions inside.
Just about 2,000 lines of functions.
Yes. And so this one right here is actually one of my favorite functions that I use in almost all of my scripts now. And it's called wait-ps direct. And what this script is, or what this function is designed to do, Tom, is when I'm rebooting a virtual machine, as I'm trying to pass in code instructions and build things, it'll actually wait until it establishes a session with PowerShell Direct, which basically is a meaningful way of telling me that the system is online and I can continue working on it.
If you can address it, and you can do pretty much whatever you want to it.
Yes.
And just to be clear, we're not going to talk about style or any of that type of stuff in this quasi-code review, because it's more important to show you the functionality of the script.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you see stuff that we can change, then absolutely we can take and we can do some pull requests in GitHub and
Dave showed you where it was on GitHub and accepting pull requests.
And actually, for our audience that's out there as well, if you have ideas on how to improve Big Demo, that's why we have the code up there.
Yeah, feel free to fork it and change it to your needs as well.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and let's minimize that one. I just have a little bit of a sleep function inside of here so that it'll just basically pause the script for a little while as I'm executing things, because sometimes when you're running long jobs, I'll call them jobs, or executing sets of instructions, I need to have pauses in there to wait for things to happen.
Yeah, this is really just a wrapper for start sleep, except it also includes a progress bar and a little bit of logging for you.
Yes, absolutely. So minimize that. I've got a little function in here for restarting, and I just called it restart demo VM. So this will just actually reboot that virtual machine, and you'll see how we call this down below. So basically, these functions are just blocks of code that we're going to use as we take and we work through. Confirming path. Now, why would we want to use something like a confirm path, Tom?
Yeah, you've got it here. Like there is a test path built into PowerShell,
and it looks like we're calling it.
Exactly. What we're doing here is, because this activity happens so often, we wrote just a little wrapper for it that if it doesn't exist, then we're going to make it.
Yeah.
And we used the alias for make directory instead of new item, just because that was what we stole from Ben, I think.
Yeah. Right.
You see that a lot. There's lots of little wrappers that just kind of expand functionality, and you might go, oh, that's hardly worth writing a function for. Well, when you see how many times it's called and called in other functions, it can really save some space.
Yeah, absolutely. And so write log is just a different way to take and get the output on write host. And so this is just going to take and is going to pick some system information and pipe that in a way that's kind of meaningful when you execute the script itself.
Yeah. On the to-do list for this, I'd suggest maybe making it write somewhere other than host, or also writing to the output stream.
Or writing to an actual log file.
That too, just so that you can capture it and have it somewhere other than in the host. Because once you close the console, anything you put on write host is gone.
Yeah, I also want to have, because the script does take approximately an hour to run and build the lab environment, one of the other to-dos that I've got inside of there is build a mail to function as well, where I'll get an email that I can actually check on my phone and see that the
Plus,
execution is successful.
Like if you lose power and the thing crashes, it might be nice to know how far through it got.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, and then we'll come into clear file here as the next one. And so clear file, what we had set up is I wanted to just clean up some of the artifacts that were built inside of the script as we were going through and building the base images. So this one here really only gets called upon as we're building the gold images, because I want to build an unattend file. The unattend file actually has a product key that's part of it, and I don't want that to be saved on that source host system. I want it to just be used, injected into the source machines that I build, but then I want to kind of delete and clean up those artifacts afterwards. Yeah. All right.
Yeah, and this is just muting some errors that can exist if you try to remove a file that doesn't exist. Then it throws an error, and we're just suppressing that.
So how's the code looking so far?
So far, so good. We got some stuff we can change, and you've got room for future growth, but it's not game-changing stuff. Like, this is going to work so far.
Awesome. So now the next one here, get unattend chunk. This one here is interesting because what this one's going to do is this one is going to take and is going to actually read a section of XML that we've got that's going to be a little lower down, which is going to be for the unattend files that we build. And we want to actually read that so that we can take and parse that and eventually take and build a file, an XML file for the unattend XML.
So there's one item here, and you might notice that, like, between lines 204 and 208,
it's
looking a little weird with the pipelines, like pipe characters on their own line, and the backtick. It might be hard to see in the recording, but there's a backtick at the end of line 204 and
here.
206.
Yep.
In PowerShell, the backtick is the escape character, and so it just negates whatever character comes next. So if the character that comes next is a new line character, it's basically saying it's a line continuation activity.
And why would we do this? We would typically do this if we wanted the code to fit in a specific window so it's a little more readable. That's how I've seen it.
Maybe
used.
like a book.
Yeah.
Right. So normally when you don't normally write your scripts for print. So what you can do instead is you also see there's some characters in PowerShell where you can leave a new line after them.
Yep.
And the PowerShell just knows that you're continuing on a new line. Like the open braces and the pipe character, you can see line 205, there's just a new line after that pipe. So what you can actually do is remove that backtick and put the pipe at the end of line 204 where you have it highlighted.
Yep.
You can do the same with 206, and that'll just kind of clean it up a little bit so that the pipe characters aren't on their own line.
Perfect.
And you still get that benefit of compressing and making it fit your print media.
Yeah, for sure. And it'll make the code look a little bit cleaner as you're taking and trying to read through it as well.
Yeah.
All right. So the next one here actually is just going to go create that, some areas inside of the unattend file. And it looks like I have finally found the Easter eggs that you've been putting inside of my scripts for the last 18 months. There's probably like thousands of demo environments that are built now.
That are all Azure C-Class trial organization.
Yes.
Registered to me.
Yes. So nice.
You owe me some VMs.
Actually, you have to pay for all those now. Now, I did actually build, I have 2 unattend chunks in here. So 2 new unattend files that would be getting built with those custom sections inside of them because I've got one for the new Windows 18.01 release for Windows Server for the Insider build. So that's I just took out a couple little sections.
It's a curious naming strategy.
What, new unattend file?
Yeah, and then new unattend file 1.
That's not good?
It's not perfect, and normally what you'd want to do instead is just expand one of them.
Okay.
If there was special code that does or doesn't get run as part of a slightly different condition, but all the other code is the same, you can add a parameter of the switch type. This one's a string type. You could add a switch parameter.
Okay.
And it's basically true false. It's a Boolean thing, in fact.
Oh, so I could say if Windows 18.01 true or something like that, then do this.
Exactly. And so it allows you to do an if-else statement based on whether or not that switch is set.
Which I'm still learning how to use properly.
Exactly.
So this was kind of my little workaround.
I teach you 13% of what you know next.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah. That'll clean it up a bit so that you don't need to duplicate the functions like that, because there's a lot of duplicated code.
Absolutely. And so now we're actually getting into the meat and potatoes of the code. So
this is the exciting part.
So the bits above were just kind of reusable components that we can use inside of any of the scripts that I have for building labs. The ones down below, this one here specifically, initialize base image. This one's going to be the builder of those gold images. Okay. And we'll use convert Windows image in order to do that. And this little piece of code is actually pretty cool, because what will happen is we'll initially go through and mount a server ISO image. And so this will mount it to whatever drive letter is there. Then I'll get the drive letter and figure out what that drive letter actually is, pass that in, and copy out the convert Windows image PowerShell script. Convert Windows image can be used as a builder of gold images for us. So I take the raw Windows Server ISO and I suck that out of the Nano Server folder, right? And so one of the interesting things I found as I was testing with the newer versions of the Insider builds on 18.01, that Nano Server folder is actually not there. Yep. So you actually have to use the older Windows Server 2016 ISO.
That's the fascinating thing, is Nano Server has kind of changed focus a couple times since the script was originally written. And so maybe there's other ways to accomplish this, but man, is it convenient to do it this way.
Yes, and I found different versions of Convert Windows image off of the GitHub repo. They work a little bit differently as well. So this is a functional working version prototype, and I know that there are probably some better ways of doing this now.
So Dave, what do they do if they can't find that file?
So if they can't find that file,
what if they don't have it?
If who doesn't have that file?
The PSM1 file that you're
it's just going to take and it's going to error out. I have to put maybe a little better error control in there.
Can we maybe distribute that file to them? Can we copy that off of a thing and put it in the GitHub repo?
I don't know if you're actually technically allowed to copy files out of a Windows ISO and publish them from licensing rules. It's the same reason you can't actually give the ISO. They have to go download the trial ISO themselves.
Do the PS1 files exist after they're no longer an ISO? Like, do they get installed on the computer anywhere? Maybe not. We can talk about that later.
But
I'm just thinking it might be handy to distribute those files along with the script.
Yeah.
And this is coming back to the code review thing. If you've got a dependency on another piece of code, it's helpful to either distribute that or have it in a way that's easily accessible for the end user.
Well, it's super easy to download that code by just using an invoke web request from GitHub and just passing it back into the working directory that we're working inside of. And that way we've always got the current copy of it. So basically we'll just, we'll build the images, we'll build a nano server image, we'll take and create the unattend files, we'll build the server core image, we'll build the server data center image as well. And one of the things that I actually found inside of here, I don't know if it's going to be in this exact version or not, was there was a little bit of a pathing issue and I blocked about it. Where was it here? Here, check this out. So this right here, server data center core, this right here is off of the latest Windows Insider build of Windows 18.01. I wanted to update my lab a little bit to have the newest version of Windows. And this used to be called Server Data Center Core. Now it's Server Data Center A Core. Do you have any idea how hard that was to figure out what was breaking in my code?
I'm sure it was excellently documented and widely known.
So on my blog, checkyourlogs.net, I've got it blogged as to how I actually figured this out. I had to mount through DISM and check to see what the names of the file were, and that probably took me about 2 weeks to figure out that that's what the exact issue was.
Not very accessible to a new user.
Because what happens when you run convert Windows image, it doesn't pass an error message that's indicative that you're actually pulling the wrong. It just says wrong file name.
Basically gives you a thumbs up or a thumbs down emoji.
It's telling you file name doesn't exist, but like I said, that one there is like your little Easter egg gold nugget that if you want to actually do this with the later versions of Windows, they changed the name of the actual edition to Server Data Center A, the letter A, core.
So is there like a B core or a C core, or is there other distros, or is there a server data center A non-core?
I have no idea. And no, actually right now you can only get that in core edition. There is no GUI. There is no GUI edition in that later version. So that was, like, we talk about the areas that were very frustrating going through, and this had nothing to do about learning PowerShell. But when you're taking your coding into custom components like this, those are the things that really take time. And that's the things that the community really appreciates, is when you actually find the fixes for particular issues like that, those can be a real pain for somebody else to have to go through. So like I said, the goal of me publishing all this code was the fact that, you know, we could take and we could share.
Give something back.
So after this is done, we would have a working folder. There would be a base VHDs folder inside of there, and I would have the nano image, I would have the Windows Core and Windows GUI image. So I had two versions. I had two versions inside of here, and then later on in my code, I can actually choose whether or not I would do a GUI install or I want to do a Core install. And if I did the Core install, I'd be installing 18.01. Okay. Now the next one here, this one was kind of neat. Was the ability using. I want to show you up here. Right here. Do you see that you can add a package inside of the the image when you build it with Convert Windows Image? This is something that Microsoft added in, that you can actually add in specific KB articles, MSUs, updates, so when it builds the gold image, they're serviced.
And just patch over them so you don't have to wait for it to do it after you spin the thing up.
Yes, and I wanted to automate this process as well, so I wrote this custom function here, which is download base Windows image updates, and this one here basically is going to take and
just collapse to inside it.
Expand. And I'm basically just using an invoke web request to actually go fetch the updates and place it into the working folder before I build the image. Then when I run Convert Windows Image on my Windows Server 2016 Gold template, it's now serviced.
Saves you a lot of bandwidth too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So now when these things come online, they actually come on either partially or fully serviced. I didn't fully service them because I was doing a bunch of WSUS work at the same time. And I wanted to make sure that I could see something in WSUS that would have to be requested. But I could fully service
that's pretty important when you're spinning up labs if you want to try it on the latest software. Well, but we don't have an environment on the latest software. Well, you can have one pretty damn quick now.
Absolutely. And you're going to find as part of my code, the one thing that I've been doing a lot more of is going and reaching out to the web as live constructs inside of my code to go fetch those artifacts. Like we were talking about Convert Windows Image, maybe have that online as well. I want that there because now I have a way to go get this live. Because I'm assuming
from Microsoft, you don't have to maintain your own repository. You just need the list of what you want.
Absolutely. Now the next 1, 2, 3, 4 sections here, this is going to assume that now we've the next 4 functions here are going to assume that we've got the base construct set up. So we needed a couple things in order to run the script. Number one, you needed to have downloaded your Windows Server ISOs. Okay, so you got to go grab those from Microsoft. You need to download the big demo script and save it inside of that working folder, then execute it. After that's done and you execute it and it builds the gold VHDX files, now we can actually go start doing something deeper down in the script when we call these functions. And so the first one is invoke demo prep VM, and that one there is going to take and is going to actually build a differencing disk that's going to take and be the construct for that new virtual machine, stand up a new Hyper-V virtual machine.
Deciding between a full and a core.
Yeah, I think there is an option in there for full or core, right? So where do we see that?
That's the stuff else that's
yes.
online.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. So if you choose the option full server, which I do have down below, it'll actually choose this parent Windows Server base image. If I choose the not full server, then it's going to choose the core.
And then you can just choose. You can just keep creating VMs, and all you got to do is specify that switcher.
The actual execution area in my script, like you saw, there's like 90% of the code is in these core functions, and the actual execution values are probably 200-300 lines of code.
Yeah, that's kind of the neat thing is we've declared all of the functions, or we're still declaring all of the functions.
Yeah.
The script hasn't actually done anything yet.
No, this is us just prepping and getting ready to call these functions down below. And so if we take a look at what we do inside of here, there was a couple issues I had when I was building this, like the guest service interface wasn't ticked off in the VM. And what happens is PowerShell Direct doesn't actually work properly until you take and you do that. And so when we take and we build this, you can change values inside of here if you wanted to. Let's say you're doing this on a laptop and you wanted these to build with maybe 1 gig of RAM instead of 4 gigs of RAM.
Sure.
You could simply change this value. This is your base VMs that would be getting built. Then after you take and after you basically build the VMs, that's kind of the builder of the VMs. Then what we would do is we would actually take and we would do something with them.
Build the guest now.
Yeah, because now what we want to do is we want to do something like setting the IP address. So I'm going to set the IP address if it's going to be DHCP because I have a parameter in here where I can define the IP address number inside of here. And so inside of my lab, I can define what the subnet's going to be for the lab, like a 172.16.100.x, and I can say that this is going to be statically assigned, where that would be important like for a domain controller. I need a static IP.
And so this is all over the PowerShell Direct channel, isn't it?
Because absolutely.
Obviously you're setting up the network. You can't do it over PowerShell remoting.
Yeah, and so if we take a look at the difference between PowerShell Direct and just regular PowerShell into the VM remoting, we basically run an invoke command and we say -VM name instead of -computer name.
And that automatically goes over the PS Direct bus, doesn't it?
It does. It goes over the VM service bus.
Right.
Absolutely. And so that's how you actually run PowerShell Direct commands. This entire script 100% is predicated on using PowerShell Direct in order to execute commands and instructions inside of the VMs that we're building.
Because without that, it doesn't really work at all, does it?
Well, we tried to do it before, but the typical problems you'd have in building these environments was DNS wasn't ready, name resolution wasn't ready, firewalls were on. There was all these issues in actually attaching to the VM and running those instructions inside the VM, and that's what PowerShell Direct has saved us. Because now I don't care if the firewalls are on. I can actually go start changing network connectivity and stuff inside the VM by going over the VM service bus.
Because before that, you'd have to sysprep an image that you already configured and make your own ISO or something.
Yes.
And that's not nearly as fast as downloading the new ISO and deploying it.
Yeah. And so that's what create demo VM does. It's going to take and it's going to do that. Then it's going to take and make a couple other changes inside of here, like configuring the WSMAN settings, trusted host settings, so that we can actually get remoting working properly on these VMs. And
because that's how you want your normal admins to administer them.
Yep.
You want your Hyper-V, you want your host owners to be able to use the VM bus if they have to.
Exactly.
And you want your regular ownership and app owners and sysadmins to use the PowerShell remoting as they normally would.
So now the next one, do you notice how this was building a VM for these would be basically my domain controller or just a general purpose VM.
Sure.
I'd also built in some functions inside of here to build out Storage Spaces Direct VMs and get them ready to build a lab for Storage Spaces Direct. But I wanted to
that was kind of your original use case.
That was, and I wanted to customize this a little bit by taking and adding a few additional network adapters in here. So we just add a few extra network adapters. I add a few extra scratch hard drives in here so we can spin up storage spaces direct. And right now I only do it with a couple hard drives because I didn't want to like make it really
finite resources.
I'll use the word kludgy inside of my folder structure because I just didn't want to bombard this with too much stuff. So what you can do if you wanted to extend this is you could easily have like 8 data drives or 12 or whatever on multiple different buses. And then down below, you'll also notice how now inside of this portion of code and this function, I'm installing failover clustering. I'm joining this machine to the domain. I'm installing the Hyper-V role. And these are the kind of things that you can do inside of these functions. Now, once again, look at what I'm doing. Invoke command -VM name. That's coming over PowerShell Direct to do all of that. But you'll also notice we had a function earlier called wait on PS Direct. So
right after you start the VM.
Yes, so this is going to actually wait with local credentials. So the local administrator account, which we defined earlier as well, which we defined down below, is going to take and is going to basically wait for this thing to finish setting itself up, getting ready, turning on. Then I'm going to execute my commands against it.
Right, because if you just start the VM and start executing commands, they're all going to fail because PS Direct's not available.
And then I do a couple other little things down below here, Tom, where I'm just going to rename the Ethernet adapters to LAN on motherboard or risers, something similar to what you'd see in production, right?
Yeah, you're just setting up the guests.
That's right. And I was actually playing around a little bit to see if I could get ESXi added into the lab. That one's not quite ready yet, so we won't show that function yet. So now the good ones. So these ones here are all brand new. You've actually never seen these pieces of code. The code above, you had actually helped me with the code review on that stuff earlier.
So
that's why we haven't really talked.
Your original work now.
Yeah. For the most part.
Or copied from Stack Overflow.
Yeah, I've had to figure out a lot of these pieces. So the first one here was installing WSUS. So what I wanted to do was, I was working a lot with Storage Spaces Direct, and I was wanting to install Virtual Machine Manager. And one of the functions you can have in Virtual Machine Manager is attaching it to a WSUS instance to patch your hosts.
Sure.
But I wanted all those updates to be downloading inside of my lab.
Right.
So this code here actually goes through and will install WSUS. And you can see I got a little bit of the help from my friend Eric at ZenApp blog. He had some base code that I could work with, and basically I incorporated that into one of my standard functions that I had inside the script. So I take, and if I run install-WSUS, I can actually target this against any machine that's in the lab. So let's say that I'm wanting to put this on the VMM server itself.
Sure.
I could basically just say install WSUS. I have 2 parameters in here, VM name and guest OS name. So I would just go -VMM01, and then if the guest OS name was VMM01, I could target it, and then it'll execute this code over the VM bus and PowerShell Direct.
Fancy.
And actually go and deploy this. So the first thing I want to do inside of here is I want to add a drive for the WSUS drive. And I want to label it as WSUS drive, and then I use a little bit of trickery here. So this piece here is cool, and I want to get your perspective on this. When I have multiple drives attached to the box as I'm adding them, I can't distinguish which one is which because there could be a little bit of randomness as to which drive letters and drive numbers. So I label the drive WSUS when I take and I format it. Then what I can do down below is I can actually take and I can call, sorry, Emil's scroll button's not working here, great. Then I can actually call on this WSUS drive letter down below by just getting into a WMI class, Win32 volume, where volume label is like WSUS. Then I can go grab the WSUS drive and drive letter, and I can pass that down below further in the script.
Yeah.
That was actually a little tricky to figure out that part of it.
Working with the disk objects in PowerShell can be a challenge for sure. There is some get PS drive information you can try to sort out, but it's effectively the same as what you're doing.
Okay.
You're getting the Win32 volumes here, which is not unlike getting the drives and being able to look through the disks that are mounted on your system. Get PS drive will also show you the logical drives, like your environment variables and your functions and all that stuff. But there's nothing wrong with doing it this way. The super critical nitpicky stuff is you probably want to use get sim instance instead of get WMI object.
Okay.
But that's a small point. And I can't remember whether or not you can filter by the WSUS name in the get WMI object itself.
Okay.
But this is definitely more readable than filtering it in the get WMI object. And so there's nothing wrong with that.
Okay, so now the next thing that I did inside of here is I installed the Windows Update services. I created the Windows Update post-install content structure, so I actually automated all of this. So basically, what ends up happening is this will actually start downloading the updates as soon as this machine comes online and WSUS is installed. So if I went for coffee or I went for dinner, I come back a couple hours later, this WSUS instance is actually already pre-primed inside of the lab, having downloaded all of the updates that I had selected.
That's pretty handy.
And so these are all just native PowerShell providers. There's a PS drive that you can attach for WSUS that we can use for this. I understand we're going to go a little bit over time with this,
Might be a double session.
But that's okay. We can adjust a little bit. So I can set the products inside of here, and all of this is 100% working. This is code that I've tested out, and it's actually pretty cool because these are the new things that I've been working on after you kind of showed me the basic construct of building the VMs.
Right.
Now I'm working on all of the things I would have to click through. If I had to document all of this stuff step by step, which I did, it was like 20 pages of step-by-step stuff that I had to go through and document. And for me, I want to automate that.
Well, exactly. That allows you to go spend time with the family, go work on something else that's more interesting, go do anything other than clicking checkboxes.
Yeah.
Clicking checkboxes is the most stereotypical, mundane thing that nobody wants to spend their time doing. Just scrolling through a list, check this one, uncheck this one, check, uncheck, uncheck. And if you can reduce that to 3 lines of code that you don't even have to look at, isn't that a better scenario to be in?
And it's consistent.
Well, and how much time does it save you? Like, I know it took you time to figure out how to do it, but if it takes you 20 minutes to do it, half an hour to do it,
and I know
every single time.
And I know our viewers are going to be wondering, like, just that one little function right there, to figure out the moving parts in here of getting everything set up for this WSUS instance, that was probably a week's worth of work.
Pretty good amount of work.
Yeah. Well, it takes time to figure this stuff out, and that's the challenge with PowerShell. You're not just going to snap your fingers and go find a commandlet that's just going to do everything you need to do. You have to. There's a lot of other moving parts that are under the covers, but once figured out, this works in Windows Server 2012.
Yep.
This works in Windows Server 2016.
This
works
forever.
in 1801. That base function that you've now built is going to be good for many more things.
Well, and you can think of it like an investment. Like, you put it in the week now, but you never have to put it in again.
Yeah.
You might have to tweak little things as Windows Server 2019 comes out or whatever, but it's not going to be nearly as substantial as the effort you put in the first time.
For sure. So what we're going to do is these other sections in here are pretty cool. We'll take a look at these quickly. We might skim over a few more of these here, just so that we can show everyone just how the actual final part of the script executes. 2 more that I worked on here, which you haven't seen. This one here is a really small little block of code. I'm building my lab in Azure. And so I build a nested Hyper-V host on a DS3 16 class machine, 64 gigs of RAM, and I can run nested Hyper-V on it. Now, in order to get the Hyper-V virtual switch to get outbound to the internet, I have to turn on NetNat on an external switch.
Because Azure won't let you.
That is correct. So this little piece of code is actually very neat. It'll actually go search to see if the internal NAT switch is actually found. If not, it'll go create one. And if it's found, it'll just skip it. So if I call my internal NAT switch 5 for whatever reason, then it'll actually have this. Now, the good news for everybody, if you want some more documented instructions on how to actually execute this, in any of our recent books, like the ones we showed you up on LeanPub, there's step-by-step instructions on how to build the lab using Big Demo.
That's handy.
Okay. So this one was neat. This one is really neat, and I know that I can clean up some things inside of here. So anything that stands out for you right here.
But honestly, it's not that bad. You're using a little bit of the shorthand that PowerShell makes available to you, like where name equals virtual NAT switch name on line 716, for instance. Where is an alias for where object, and there, you can put some brackets. But you know what? I don't get too mad at it because it's readable. Like, you can read through this and it's descriptive enough that you can kind of tell what it does.
Yep.
Where I get choked up about aliases is where it's like GCM space pi into something else where they're really cryptic and they look like Linux commands, to be honest. Best practice says make them all their full name and their full alias or their full parameter names and everything, but I'm not gonna get too bent out of shape about it.
Okay, so the next one that I have was installing RAS. So I wanted to enable routing inside of that lab, so I've enabled this NAT switch. Now I wanted to take a router, and I wanted to attach a couple network adapters inside of it, and then I would go through and I would actually configure RAS as part of the switch. funny enough, the netsh commands weren't working for me for all of the commands. They should have. So I actually had to revert back to taking and executing a cmd/c and running netsh to get these pieces finished.
So that's a
because
workaround.
they wouldn't pass through properly. It just wouldn't configure that last little bit. And I'm not actually using native PowerShell at that point in time. I'm just piping into netsh here to try to get the job done that I'm looking for, because there are no PowerShell providers for RAS.
Huh.
So
what you might do is add a comment in there just to specify that
why.
you know that cmd.exe/c, the rest of it isn't normally necessary, but it is here.
Yep.
And that'll prevent somebody else who's looking at the code for the first time from going, oh, I can clean that up, and then it breaks.
Yeah. Yeah, and so this, once again, this little piece here, that was probably about another 4 days worth of work just trying to figure out that was the workaround for that.
And you're giving this away.
And giving it away. Yeah, so the total amount of time I figure I've got into all the big demo functions inside of here, it's got, I think we're pushing on 6 to 8 months worth of dev time in here. But I use it for all my books. So this is my way of building the lab now.
Well, and not just books. You use it for all your labs.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So now the next one is, I wanted to figure out how to take and how to install SQL, and installing SQL for different System Center products. So there's a different way you have to install SQL for DPM. Like, for example, you have to have the .NET Framework 3.5 installed before you install SQL for the Data Protection Manager server, whereas for all the other products, it doesn't matter. So they're separate installs.
Of course.
So basically, let's just go take a look at one here where we would basically build an unattend file. So this is just a little bit of code just so that I can go create an unattend file and put all my switches inside of there. And I've started to do this more than just going and downloading an unattend file, because I can customize it on the fly. Yes, I understand it increases the size of my code block because I've just got a bunch of raw text in here, but it's also all self-contained inside of that function.
Yeah, it makes it easier to redistribute.
Yeah. So I just basically go create the unattend file. And then I've got some functions in here that I figured out for example, how to create a SQL server. So this code starts to look familiar because I just copy and pasted it from above. I go and I edit the virtual machine here, and I'm going to create a new virtual hard disk for the SQL data drive. I call it SQL. I call that down below with the same functions that I showed you before. And then what I do inside of here is I actually take and I copy over the SQL Server ISO inside the VM. I understand I don't need to do that. I understand it adds a little bit of space to the VM. But then what I do is I mount that VM as part of the install, or that ISO as part of the install, instead of having to go through and extract files and bring them in. Because at the end of the day, I need those files for the installer. So this is the new pieces of code that you haven't seen, where I'll actually take and I'll go run the installs, configure firewall rules, and these are
comment, change this.
Yes. So we can see some cool stuff in here, right? So I'll take and I'll do stuff like playing around, like downloading SQL Server Management Studio and installing it. My lab would be routing enabled, so I can actually reach out to the internet from these VMs and do this kind of stuff.
And here's a really good example of that type of code, documentation and inline commenting from before, where you said invoke web request is really slow, because otherwise somebody might look and go, why not use download file?
Yeah.
Or why not use invoke web request? And then this is exactly what we're just talking about.
Yeah, and normally I was thinking I might not leave that in there, but I was leaving it in there for the point that I felt that maybe people would find that a little bit valuable as they would go through.
Totally.
And so then I've got more functions for like installing SCOM and DPM.
More
I've got a function in here for installing Veeam, because I was playing around with Veeam. And then down below, this is where we would actually execute the script. So we're at about line 2000. And then I can actually take and I can actually build some stuff out inside of here. So right here is where we would take and we would start building out some base variables. Now when you download the script from GitHub, there's 2 sections in here that you need to replace that I won't give you. I won't give you the product keys. So right here
there's nothing free in this world
except
our books.
You have to change the Windows key here, and you have to change the Windows key value down here somewhere, product key.
Right there.
Yeah, so you need to change these 2 values with just the product key. So the 5-section product key, just put those in there.
Or you end up with the trial.
Yeah, or you'll end up with the script bombing out, because I haven't put any error checking inside of there.
I guess that's good too.
So now, these are the actual regions down below where we actually do some work. So this was the end of all the functions up above and the initialization parts. And now we'll actually get started with doing some stuff. So the first thing we'll do is we'll check to see if those are built, if those images are built. If they're already built and those files are already downloaded, then we'll skip. So this is where we would actually build. And see, this is why we would use those functions, because now I initialize one line of code which calls the function, and says what I want to do from up above, right? And that's kind of the whole idea of this script. Then we'll build the lab VMs. So this right here is where we'll choose how many VMs we'll build.
And their names.
Yes, exactly. So you can see I've got 2 domain controllers, a DHCP server, management server, router, a virtual machine manager service, SCOM, and DPM. And these are all going to be built with full server. If I don't put full server on there, those would be built with core and they would be built with 1801.
The new goodness.
So let's just think about this for a sec. I want to change my lab from Windows Server 2016 RTM to Windows Server 1801 Core Edition.
Sounds like you're removing a couple switches and then done.
Delete that, and now all of a sudden your domain controller is running on 1801 Core.
Pretty slick.
Very slick. Right?
Especially because this is the part that you're going to want to screw with the most.
This is where you're going to make your changes to customize for your lab. The stuff up above is going to work.
I spun up a full server lab. Cool. Now what would happen if I spun up a core lab? What would happen if I spun one up? I don't need SCOM in this one.
Yes, exactly. Or the section up above where we were defining the ISOs. What would happen if we just changed that ISO to the latest build?
And wouldn't you rather just kind of play with like 7 or 8 lines of code instead of 2,000 lines of code?
Absolutely. Now, the next one here, Tom, is going to be the actual build once those machines are built. So now I've got a Hyper-V server. I've got the VMs are online. Everything's ready to go. We're ready to do something inside of here. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to actually build out the domain controller. So this is kind of
those were all the preps. Gotcha. Now we're configuring the servers.
That's right. So now we've kind of got some cool stuff that we're doing inside of here. Now the one thing that I did have to change in hard code in here is I want to change this later on, and maybe you can give me a hand with this, is that I've hard coded the default gateway to 172.16.100.254 because that was the IP address that I'm going to use for the router to get out.
Oh, and you'd rather have that.
And I would rather have that automated up above, and I just haven't had a chance to do that. So the only subnet that'll work in the lab right now is 172.16.100, and that was never really the way that the script was designed to work.
Yeah.
So it's easy enough to change that out and fix that. So I set the default gateway because I want this domain controller to be able to get out to the internet because it's going to serve DNS for the rest of the lab. Right. And so now, if you take a look here, we can see that I'm installing Active Directory. So I'm installing the Active Directory role, and then we're going to actually go through and configure Active Directory down below. So install an ADDS Forest, your domain name, the domain name you've chosen. The cool part about this is it doesn't matter what type of server you run that on. Now you have the code to actually go build AD with PowerShell.
Right. Yeah. You just stand up a vanilla server and then deploy a few lines.
Absolutely. And so if we take a look, if you want to learn about how to build a DHCP server, here's how to build a DHCP server. Here's how to take and set a scope inside of there that'll service the lab. So first I build the domain controller, then I'm going to take and build a DHCP server. Then I'm going to take and I'm going to configure the users in the lab. And so this is where I'd configure all the service accounts for
This is when you really start setting up the environment.
Yep. So these are all the service accounts that would be built for the lab and what groups they're members of. I've cheated a little bit for a lot of the lab. I've just added stuff into domain admins. It's not really best practice, but it's my lab.
You've made it kind of specialized for what you want.
Yep.
And this is the test environment that you want to come up every time.
Yep.
And in the future, maybe it'll be a little bit different, a little more modular, but right now it's this.
And so now the next one we're going to do is how about configuring Active Directory certificate services?
Everybody's favorite.
So configuring Enterprise Root CA. That's it. That's all the code that you need to actually build out your certificate infrastructure.
A lot of people find that a lot of painful.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Now here you go.
So now you can take and have certificate templates, and you have a certificate authority that's built out, and this is just going to take and this is going to run on whatever server you have taken and you have defined. So now we'll build the router in the lab. So this is where the router is going to actually get stood up and built. Okay. So the router will get stood up and built. And now we'll take and we'll build out the management server. And so this one here was going to build out the management server with VMs. So it's going to build a VM called Management 01. It's going to attach to that. It's going to install some RSAT tools inside of there. And then you see how I can just call inside of there install-vim, which was the function up above.
Yeah,
so
and toggle
once I've primed this, if I wanted to install SQL on that box, I could just add in install-SQL, and it'll install SQL inside of that VM. And that's the way
you can install Vim on whichever of these servers you really want it to.
Yep. So now let's take a look at installing SCVMM 1801, the latest release of System Center Virtual Machine Manager. So I take and I add a few little roles, I adjust the RAM, give it 8 gigs of RAM, and then in here you can see how I can actually just run install VMM, install SQL, install WSUS, And that's all I'm doing inside of here with those functions above, because now universally I can choose now what components I want to go on what server based on those functions.
Exactly.
And I think the logic in there is very good because it makes it very portable and very modular.
Exactly. That's the whole point, is you can copy and paste those functions out into all kinds of different scripts and just execute them in one line.
Because look right here. Do you see how I have like install SQL? So I want to put SQL on there first, and then I went ahead and I built out SCOM afterwards, and then I built out DPM, and then I said I'm going to try installing VMM later because I was having a problem that SQL Server was taking a little bit too long to install, and it wasn't coming online, so I needed a little bit more time to sit there and bake in the oven. And so what I did is I just came down here, and that was my code base right there to install VMM later. So I just call the VM, I call the guest OS name, and then I install VMM here down below. Then I add a second domain controller, DCO2, at the end of the lab build. So we just define the name, give it an IP address, and that's it. So you can see the code blocks down below are very simple, very eloquent way of taking and building this out. And then at the end, I want to build a bunch of nested storage spaces direct nodes.
Right.
So now I can go through and take that same logic and build out a failover cluster and actually start doing some things inside of the lab.
And this is how you deploy a whole crap load of stuff in a real big hurry.
Yes. Now, the best part about this, and I understand we've gone a little bit over time in the session, but
make it a double session.
But the functions that are built for install SQL, the functions that are built for going through and doing this, that what I've learned right now, and we've had this conversation that how long have I really been writing my own PowerShell scripts for? Let's say 12 months, 18
Maybe
months.
That's a fair,
Let's say starting with it 18 months, like really dabbling and doing this stuff. These portions of code inside of here can actually be broken down in standalone components.
Yep.
And so I want to just show everybody that real quick here as the final part of this session, Tom, is that inside of my GitHub repo, if we come over to my repositories here, and if I come into deploying System Standard Data Protection Manager, I was actually building these out as standalones.
Oh, look at you.
And so those are actually been pulled out of Big Demo because that's a lot of code. And so now, for example, let's say I wanted to install DPM here. This has actually been broken out into a standalone component. And I've done some different things inside of here where I'll actually prompt, and you had your favorite bit of code where you have a pop-up window come up and
open file dialog box.
Yes, and so I've used that inside of here now to actually ask for where the source content was. And so this right here is now a standalone component because guess what? Big Demo for me is not just about a lab exercise.
Right.
Big Demo for me is about an exercise in installing this stuff into production. And so now these standalone modules that I'm building can now be used for my production deployments in anybody's environment.
Yeah, if you test it out in lab, but if it works in lab, what do you usually do with code? Promote it to prod.
Exactly. So that's one of the big areas that I've been working on, is taking that code that I use in Big Demo, taking those functions and making those functions work as standalones. So the ones I've got working as standalones right now, install-vim, install-SQL, install-VMM, install-SCOM, install-DPM, those are all working as standalone modules that could be actually ported into anybody's environment. So when that VM is built, you're the customer. You've hired me as a consultant to come in and install that component for you. I ask for a built Windows Server 2016 VM that's patched, and that's it. Even if it's not joined to the domain, I can set my code to actually join that thing to the domain, install all the prerequisite roles, prompt for the media that I need, mount the media that I need, install the software after I've installed all the roles, test and do some validation, and for me, that's PowerShell.
That's going to be a big hit on your billable hours.
Yes.
But it's going to be a huge increase in your repeat business.
Absolutely. And so that's kind of where I've come so far with Big Demo. So what do you think?
I think it's pretty good. I like that you've taken the step to modularize the individual functions, because that's really handy for people who already have parts of it. Where, like, I already have the hardware being provisioned, or the VMs themselves being provisioned, but I don't have the automated configuration of my domain controllers and my CA and my SCOM and stuff like that. And like that on its own is hugely valuable, but most people don't even have the first part.
Yeah.
So I think it's excellent functional work. You've got a couple areas where you've already identified you're going to add some stuff and tweak some stuff, and we'll work on that together. But it's a impressive body of work, especially for somebody who hasn't been. You're not a professional developer, and you just picked it up maybe a little over a year ago.
Yeah,
it's really well done. You should be proud.
And it's neat to know that with PowerShell and the PowerShell community, how fast one can ramp up with this stuff.
Yeah, it's really, like, it takes some time to discover the ins and outs of some of the products, but the language itself is really discoverable. Yeah. There's a lot of good support out there.
Awesome. Well, everybody, thank you very much for attending our MVP Days virtual conference. Yes, I know we went a little bit overtime with this kind of bonus session that Thomas and I have done. Hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully you get out there and use Big Demo. That's what it's out there for.
Yeah, we'd love feedback. Open an issue on the GitHub repo. Find us on Twitter.
Absolutely, and we'll take a look at it. If you've got ideas for improving the code, or maybe some of your own functions you'd like to chuck in there, reach out to us. We're available.
Change it. Let us know what you changed and how you adapted it for your needs.
Yep. All right. Talk to you later, everyone.